All right, in this video here we have Pastor Kendall Lankford of the Shepherd's Church. And this video that he has up is called How the Book of Revelation Proves Postmillennialism. It does not, by the way. It does not prove postmillennialism. And he's already said that I'm not going to go through Revelation chapter 20. Well, Revelation chapter 20 is the only place in all of Scripture that talks about a millennium. And this is what I see with postmillennialists all the time. They ignore Revelation chapter 20. They've done this over and over and over again. But here is a response that somebody now just to understand something. Most of these modern day postmillennialists are also high partial preterists. High partial preterists, believing that most of the book of Revelation has to do with the temple destruction in 70 AD and the destruction of the city of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And that John is prophesying events before that, and therefore they have to be dogmatic that John wrote the book of Revelation before 70 AD. They have to be dogmatic about it, or else their whole system falls apart, their system of high partial preterism. But here is a response that Pastor Kendall gave to somebody in this video who said right here, TR Fatman, so you don't see Nero and the Roman emperor position in general as the beast? Well, what beast? The sea beast of Revelation 13, 1 through 10. That's what I think he's probably talking about. I look forward to your series in 2025. Check it out what Pastor Kendall writes here. I do see Nero as the beast, especially with the gematria of his name being 666. Well, anybody who goes to the gematria and the 666 thing, because that 666 thing can be applied to numerous different things. Okay, don't rely on the gematria. But in this episode, my goal was simply to draw comparisons between the Olivet Discourse and Revelation. But since the episode was focused on downfall of the Jews in 70 AD and as a result of the first advent of Christ, and since I was trying not to get into Nero and the Romans, etc., but I do see Nero as the Antichrist, essentially. And so my response here was to cite John Calvin. John Calvin, in his commentary, ccel.org, commentary on 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3. And I quoted down here, here's Calvin's commentary. It was no better than an old wives' fable that was contrived respecting Nero, that he was carried up from the world, destined to return again to harass the church by his tyranny. And yet the minds of the ancients were so bewitched that they imagined that Nero would be Antichrist. Paul, however, does not speak of one individual as the Antichrist, but a kingdom that was to be taken possession of by Satan, that he might set up a seat of abomination in the midst of the temple, that is the church. And that's what Calvin knows that Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 means the church when he uses the word temple there. Notice what Calvin says, which we see accomplished in popery. And he goes on, and I would highly recommend Calvin's. Calvin wasn't a big eschatological expositor, but he did give us some real good gems. So my response was to quote John Calvin, exposition of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3. No better than an old wives' fable that was contrived respecting Nero, etc. And Paul, however, does not speak of one individual, but of a kingdom that was to be taken possession of by Satan, so that he might set up a seat of abomination in the midst of God's temple, that is his church, which we see accomplished in popery. Again, not my fault you preterists can't read, and instead go along with Jesuit-concocted fables in your preterist views. Notice the origin of the first systematization of the preterist school of prophetic interpretation. It was by the Jesuits, and it was a response to the God-blessed, God-ordained Protestant Reformation. Notice, this is Louis de Alcazar, was a Spanish Jesuit theologian known for his one of his books, 1614, published after his death, so posthumously, putting forward what would later be called a preterist view of Bible prophecy. Here's the this is just Wikipedia right here. Again, not a scholarly source, but a source from which to begin, further study. Louis de Alcazar, Spanish Jesuit theologian. Notice the dates, 1554 to 1613. Therefore, the Jesuits were specifically designed and set up to try to overthrow the Protestant Reformation. That was their mandate. That was their goal, especially in areas of systematic theology. Works he is best known for is Vistagatio Arcani Sensus Apocalypsi, published after his death, putting forward what would be later called a preterist view of Bible prophecy. Preterism. Preterism, the Jesuits, Jesuit Louis de Alcazar. And that's what the Shepherd's Church, CREC, and Pastor Kendall Lankford, following after Kenneth L. Gentry and people like that, in their preterist nonsense, making up nonsense regarding God's prophetic word. Okay? That is obviously fallacious. And then, of course, the opposite of that is the dispensational futurist eschatological system. So you got preterism and futurism. Both of these have to do with the Antichrist. So point number 3 of futurism right here, that a single solitary individual called Antichrist will rise to power still in the future from our own time here. A third temple will be rebuilt in Jerusalem, all that stuff. Antichrist shall enter into it during his reign and claim to be God. Also, that the majority of the book of Revelation will be fulfilled during these last few years of Earth's history. And that gets into this myth of a 7-year period of great tribulation taken from a fallacious interpretation of Daniel 9:24 through 27. So that's futurism and preterism. Again, why do we talk about because it's truly an amazing thing to witness. Really, it is. The preterists arguing with futurists. So it's preterism versus futurism. And both of them are abandonments of the Reformation. Both of them. Just a summary of the two positions. Preterists are teaching that the majority of the events of the book, of the events depicted in the book of Revelation, are relaying events surrounding the siege of Jerusalem and subsequent destruction of the city and its temple in 70 AD. Then a huge time gap occurs between that time and the second advent of Christ. Number 2, dispensational futurists, on the other hand, believe that only the opening chapters of the book of Revelation have to do with the church, but that the majority of the events recorded thereafter, either Revelation 4 through 19 or 6 through 19, usually it's 6 through 19, are still future from our own time, only after a mythical pre-trib rapture and only during a mythical 7-year period of tribulation. Both preterism and futurism are plagued with having to insert huge time gaps in their respective eschatological beliefs and in the biblical prophecies in order to substantiate their respective positions. Preterists insert a time gap between the events that occurred in 70 AD, with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple there, and the second advent. So a huge time gap between 70 AD and the second advent of Christ. Futurists insert a huge time gap, not only between the 69th and 70th weeks of Daniel 9:24 through 27, but also in the book of Revelation when they assert that the majority of the events in the book will only begin after the rapture. A pre-trib rapture happens, which they assert is a temporally separate event than the second advent. Again, that's a false presupposition, as they are the same event in 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 18. The coming of Christ, the resurrection of the saints, and the rapture are all the same event. Our Protestant forefathers, at least the ones who gave expositions on the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, and John Calvin did not, by the way. He didn't go too deeply into eschatological interpretation, but he does give us some gems like he does in his exposition of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. But all of our Protestant forefathers knew better than these modern-day preterists and futurists. They were historicists. They viewed that the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation were recording a continuing unfolding of events that would occur from their time, the time of their respective writings. Daniel, living in the time of the Babylonian Empire, he actually lives to see the overthrow of the Babylonian Empire by the Medo-Persians. But he doesn't live into the Grecian Empire or the Roman Empire, that's for sure. All the way up until the Second Advent and beyond. For example, they utilize the day equals year principle for all the time-specific prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, the most important of which is the 1260 days, 42 months, time times half a time prophecy, given 7 times in Scripture, twice in Daniel, Daniel 7 and Daniel 12, and then 5 times in the book of Revelation, twice in Revelation chapter 11, twice in Revelation chapter 12, and once in Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 through 10. So this means that the little horn of Daniel 7, time times half a time, 1260 years, the 2 witnesses prophesying in sackcloth, Revelation 11, and the woman in the wilderness, Revelation chapter 12, and the sea beast. The sea beast is the same as the little horn of Daniel chapter 7. Both of these are talking about the Antichrist. The little horn of Daniel 7 and the sea beast of Revelation 13, 1 through 10 are the same entity. And all this whole time prophecy, 1260 literal years, were all to take place during the same time period of 1260 literal years. Reformed Baptist theologian, pastor, and Bible expositor, Dr. John Gill. We've already seen before Jonathan Edwards, day equals year principle, 1260 years is what Jonathan Edwards says. So does John Gill. He emphasized the day equals year principle in interpreting the prophetic scriptures. Gill was an historicist. He was not a preterist, as some preterists have wrongly claimed in the past. While Gill wrote that the events of Matthew 24 had only to do with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD, indeed in his commentary he did, but if you go read his body of doctrinal divinity, he actually says rightly that Matthew chapter 24 is a dual prophecy. Yes, Jesus is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, but he's also blending that with his own second advent. And for you hyper-preterists out there, he is not saying that these are the same event in any way, shape, or form. But a common preterist interpretation, John Gill's overall views of Bible prophecy were not preteristic. We can determine John Gill's historicist perspective when we look at what he wrote concerning the day equals year principle. Commenting on Revelation 11, verse 2, do not measure the court outside the temple, leave that out, etc., and they will trample the holy city 40 and 2 months. Gill writes, the holy city they shall tread 40 and 2 months, which being reduced to years makes just 3 years and a half. But then this date cannot be understood strictly and literally. This is too short a time for the whore of Babylon, Revelation 17, for her to gain so much power, honor, and riches, as in the 13th, 17th, and 18th chapters of the book of Revelation show. It's too short a time for the afflictions and persecutions of the saints by her. Wherefore, this must be understood prophetically of so many months of years, reckoning a day for a year after the prophetic style. This is the style of God's prophetic word, makes 1260 literal years. The witnesses prophesying in sackcloth, Revelation 11, that's 1260 years. The church is being hid and nourished in the wilderness, Revelation chapter 12, that's 1260 years. And of the beast's reign, Revelation 13, 1 through 10, or the little horn of Daniel 7, 1260 years. Okay? This date is not to be reckoned from the outer court, but from the first of the Antichrist reign, when the Pope of Rome was declared universal bishop, and that was after the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century. That's when this 1260 years began, sometime after the fall of the Roman Empire. I say about 538 AD, with the 3 horns of Daniel 7 plucked up by the roots, the 3 of the 10 horns plucked up by the roots before the little horn could rise to power. In fact, it's the Jesuits of old who, if they knew this conflict between Preterists and Futurists was going on in otherwise Bible-believing churches, would be absolutely thrilled. Thrilled. We are thrilling the Jesuits by having Preterists argue against Futurists, and you're both abandoning the Reformation. It's unbelievable how arrogant and egotistical. Me. That's what it's all about. arrogance. You are not standing on the shoulders of the giants who came before you, Pastor Kendall. All you preterists and all you futurists, dispensational futurists or whatever. You're not standing on the shoulders of the giants of those who came before you. You are abandoning them. You're kicking them in the shins and pushing them to the ground. That's what you're doing. Sad. Some authors who revealed the truth about the systematic and origins of both preterism and futurism. Notice this quotation from Joseph Tanner in his book, Daniel and the Revelation. So towards the close of the century of the Reformation, the 16th century, two of Rome's most learned doctors set themselves to the task, each by different means, to accomplish the same end, namely that of diverting men's minds from perceiving the fulfillment of the prophecies of the Antichrist in the papal system. The Jesuit Louis de Alcazar devoted himself to bring into prominence the Preterist method of interpretation, which asserted that the prophecies of Antichrist were fulfilled. Antichrist prophecies were fulfilled before the popes ever ruled at Rome, before the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century AD. On the other hand, the Jesuit Francisco Ribera, later followed by the premier Jesuit scholar and enemy of biblical Protestantism, Robert Bellarmine, Society of Jesus, that's the Jesuits, tried to set aside the application of these prophecies to the papal power by bringing, notice, it's all to divert men's minds from perceiving in the prophecies of Antichrist the papacy. That's what it's for. Preterism, all eyes off the papacy. Futurism, all eyes off the papacy. By bringing out the futurist system, which asserts that these prophecies refer properly not to the career of the papacy, but to that of some future supernatural individual, Mr. Diabolical, who is yet to appear, right? Antichrist is a single solitary individual human being. That's not Antichrist. The beast means an empire. Go to Daniel 7. 4 beasts that rise up out of the sea. None of those are individuals. They're all empires. Suzerain empires. Suzerain kingdoms, if you want to know the truth. And to continue in power for 3.5 years, the last 3.5 years of Earth's history before the return of Christ. And there are many other quotations just like this, even from Roman Catholic scholars who assert that the modern schools of prophetic thought, preterism, futurism, were devised by the Jesuits in order to overthrow the correct Protestant interpretations of Bible prophecy. Now let me ask you all, don't you see that Jeff Durbin, Pastor Kendall, Kenneth L. Gentry, Gary DeMar, all these preterists out there, that they're following after that which was first systematized by the Jesuit scholar Louis de Alcazar? And don't dispensational futurists not see John MacArthur? Dispensational futurist nonsense he's been promulgating for over 50 years. Don't they see that they are following the futurist school of prophetic thought first systematized by another Jesuit, Francisco Ribera, and later followed by Robert Bellarmine? I say don't fall for either one of these fallacious schools of prophetic interpretation without at least studying historical theology and the historicism of our Protestant forefathers concerning issues of Bible prophecy. You owe it to God, as one of his children, to do so. What is Jeff Durbin, Pastor Kendall, Preterist doing? Simply replacing one false eschatological system, dispensational futurism, for another false system, preterism and postmillennialism. By the way, Jonathan Edwards, who these people will tout as the godfather of postmillennialism, Jonathan Edwards was not a preterist. He was an historicist par excellence. And believe me, it ain't just Durbin who has done this. He's only following others who have gone before him because he respects some of their works. Gentry, Bonson, DeMar, etc. So a sad thing, to be sure. Very sad, to be sure. I lament this. I'll continue to lament this, but this is why I argue against this utter nonsense. Making mincemeat of God's prophetic word. Where do we see the first mention of Antichrist? Daniel chapter 7, what rough beasts and the Antichrist. Futurism, future Mr. Diabolical, Preterism, Antichrist was a single solitary individual, or that Antichrist was a series of pagan Roman emperors who persecuted the church, but then that was all over by the 5th century AD. Both of these systems are false. Daniel 7, and parallel with Daniel chapter 2, Daniel 7 is a repeat and expanded version of Daniel chapter 2. 4 great beasts. This is from Daniel 7 now I'm citing here. I saw 4 great beasts coming up out of the sea. So 4 sea beasts. The first was like a lion. Second, like a bear, raised up one side, 3 ribs in its teeth. The third, like a leopard with wings. 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful. That's Roman Empire. And the 4th beast, it had 10 horns. And then a little one sprung up, but only after 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the root. See that? Daniel 7, verses 2 through 8. And this little horn had a mouth speaking great things. Daniel 7, the 4 beasts that rise up out of the sea. Who are they? Revelation 13, 1 through 10 talks about a sea beast. Therefore, it's not a single solitary individual human being. It is an empire, a suzerain kingdom. A suzerain kingdom is a kingdom that has lesser vassal kingdoms under its purview or under its authority. And all of these beasts were empires, the suzerain kingdoms. Okay, the lion with eagle's wings, the Babylonian Empire. These are the rough estimate dates right here, 605 to 539 BC. This is when Daniel was living during this time. He even lived long enough to see the overthrow of the Babylonian Empire and the rise of the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay, chest and arms of silver is the parentheticals here are the parallel of Daniel chapter 2. So the head of gold, chest and arms of silver, the metal man image of Daniel chapter 2. Then you got the leopard with bird's wings, the Grecian Empire, the conquest of Alexander the Great. Very important because during the Roman Empire would be the time of Christ and the apostles, and the writing of the New Testament, which was not written in Latin. Latin, the language of the Romans, even though it was written during the Roman Empire, it was still written in Koine Greek, the New Testament. That's how important Hellenization was. So again, it's important to know the history of Hellenization under the Grecian Empire. And then the Roman Empire, of course, 2 legs of iron of Daniel chapter 2. The feet and toes of iron mixed with clay does not begin until after 476 AD, till the Roman Empire is gone. Therefore, the stone that smites the metal man image in Daniel chapter 2 cannot represent the first advent. It represents the second advent. This is where preterists get it all wrong as well. Bible prophecy is all wrong in the preterist view, all over the place. The 10 horns that sprung up out of this empire, the Roman Empire, symbolize the 10 lesser tribal kingdoms that made up the Roman Empire after its fall in 476 AD. I give a list here: Ostrogoths, Burgundian, Vandals, Heruli, Visigoths, Suevi, Alemanni, Franks, Saxons, Lombards. Notice that the 18th century Reformed Baptist theologian, Dr. John Gill, again, out of this kingdom that is the Roman Empire, 10 kingdoms which sprung out of the Roman Empire. That's what the prophecy is about, or into which the Roman Empire was broken and divided upon the dissolution of it about AD 476. He gives Meade's list, very similar to my own. Sir Isaac Newton's list, very similar to my own. Back to the prophecy, the 4th beast. And I wanted to know the truth about the 10 horns that were... See, Daniel desired to know the truth about these things. Daniel did. Can't wait to meet Daniel in the heavenly kingdom, by the way, because we look back on prophecy as history, whereas Daniel was looking forward as, you know, as actual prophecy for the future from his own time. The other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. So this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. Now notice this. This horn made war with the saints. Who is Daniel calling the saints? It's New Testament Christians. New Testament, because this doesn't spring up, this horn, until after the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century AD. So Daniel is actually seeing the saints here, New Testament saints. Not all of whom are Jewish, by the way. Most of them are not Jewish. But this little horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. That is the second advent. So the little horn will continue on in power all the way up until the second advent. And 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8 also tells us that Jesus will destroy the Antichrist at his coming. At his coming. The little horn is the Antichrist. Before this horn could rise, three of the 10 would have to be plucked up by the roots. The Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths, these were all Arian, heretic kingdoms, lesser kingdoms, vassal kingdoms of the once suzerain kingdom of the Roman Empire. Basic outline of the three horns being plucked up by the roots. I've done this before. I don't really want to go through it again, but the Heruli were the first barbarian tribes to invade and subsequently rule over Rome. And then 476, that happened with Odoacer, and that was the official fall of the Roman Empire, was 476. He usurped Romulus Augustulus, who was either 16 or 11, some sources say. I think I've heard somewhere say he was 13. We can't be sure, but while Odoacer did not execute him, he did proclaim himself king in Rome. Odoacer, Arian, but he was tolerant toward the Catholic Trinitarians, and that's what Catholic means, literally universal, but it has to do with the doctrine of the Trinity. If you are a Trinitarian, it means you're a Catholic. That's what it means historically. It doesn't mean you're a papist or a Romanist. So the first of the three horns uprooted. The second of the three horns came to its end with the vanquishing of the Vandals. And then the Ostrogoths were the third of the three to be plucked up by the roots. So 538 AD, that's typically when I would begin the 1260 years, is from 538 AD. If you want to know the reason for that, watch this. Napoleon and the papal church, not just the Catholic Church. Baptists call it, we call ourselves Catholic too because we're Trinitarians. But this is in 538 AD, 1260 years from that time period is 1798, and that's when the Pope at the time, Pope Pius VI, was usurped. The French Republic, French armies rode into Rome, usurped Pope Pius VI off his throne, and stripped the papal states from him in 1798. That was the deadly wound dealt out on the papacy. A deadly wound which Scripture tells us in Revelation 13 would be healed. And that wound has been healing ever since it was inflicted in 1798. Again, how does a beast, an empire, get wounded? Well, by the usurpation of its primary leader or leadership. Okay? In this case, Pope Pius VI, and demanded the Pope renounce his temporal power. Okay? Very simple stuff. So, again, Preterism, completely, I mean, you want to talk about trampling on God's prophetic word and ignoring the Protestant Reformation, ignoring what they had to say, kicking them in the shins and pushing them over onto the ground and saying, no, I know better than you. You want to talk about arrogance right here. Arrogance. In all the preterists, not just Pastor Kendall. I'm just picking on him today or for the past couple days. But all the preterists, you guys are arrogant to do so. You're arrogant to ignore the Reformation. So long video, I know, but hopefully it is substantive. I'm going to keep repeating these things because these people make their videos. I figure I can make videos too with a laptop and QuickTime player. So let me know what you think. Comment down below. Lord willing, talk to you soon. Soli Deo Gloria.